Welcome to Fine Line Station, where I read out letters and emails sent by you, the listeners. They are real life stories about the uncanny, the creepy, and the unknown. I am your host, Charlie Fox, and I hope you're ready to tune in. Good afternoon, everyone. Today I have a lovely handwritten letter sent in by a gentleman called Hans. He is an artist with a fascination of illusionary techniques used in the art world. His letter shares his artistic journey with us and how he ended up with a little more insight than expected. So with that, let's take a wander through Hans's story. Hello, Miss Fox. It's a pleasure to write to you. I hope you don't mind me sharing my story with you this evening. Many would call it a strange one, and many would think I have fallen into the stereotypical artistic ways and started seeing things where there isn't anything. While I can admit my head is often in the clouds, daydreaming of colours and shapes that overlap in the world I see, I like to think I have at least part of my head screwed on right. But I suppose we shall see what you and your listeners think when I reach the end of my tale. You see, I grew up loving art. Even as a toddler, I chose finger painting over anything else, covering myself and whatever I could get my hands on in paint. I would spend hours weaving chalk around the backyard into different shapes until the whole ground looked like squiggles had been spilt over it. My father was always unimpressed with the messes I used to make, but my mother would simply shake her head with a smile and told him to let the boy get it out of his system. As I reached the age of 12, I became especially fascinated with watercolours. One of my primary school teachers had a set she would use during our breaks, and I would curiously peer over while eating my lunch. She noticed my interest and managed to get a few kid-friendly watercolour palettes for the children to use during our art lessons. It was wondrous, and I have fond memories of running outside with my friends to paint a new leaf or copy the texture of bark coming off a tall tree. During high school, I took as many art classes as I could. I started using charcoal, much to the dismay of my father, who soon found black fingerprints everywhere. But I fell in love with the shading I was able to achieve. The idea of covering a piece in charcoal to begin with, but slowly bringing it back to life by removing sections with erasers was thrilling. Sometimes you would go too dark, or accidentally wipe your hand across a section that hadn't been set yet, but I enjoyed those risks. By this point, my parents started to realize that art wasn't simply a phase, or even just an interest of mine. I told them blatantly that I was engrossed with it all and I could not get enough. I ended up applying for an art school interstate. I was accepted with my portfolio full of abstract portraits and landscapes in both charcoal and watercolour. I still like to think the contrast of the two materials showcased my variety and secured me a spot in the program. I was very lucky that my parents were quite well off. It took some convincing from my mother, but eventually my father allowed me to attend the art school. I doubt he nor my mother would have agreed to it if not for the glowing statement sent with my acceptance letter. So, on to art school I went. I tried new mediums and met new people. It was during this time my love for observing art became just as important to me as making my own. We had many excursions to local galleries, both tiny exhibitions housed in one room to large sweeping buildings full of art decades older than myself. I was even lucky enough to go on a few overseas trips with my classmates. Those trips were truly special moments I hold close to my heart. It was during the final year I met the love of my life, Lila. We connected instantly and got married shortly after both graduating. I exhibited for a few years after that, but after our son Harry was born, I needed a more stable income. I ended up becoming an art teacher at the same institute I attended. It was hard limiting my time to create my own art, especially with my little free time now as a father, but I must admit I found a special sense of satisfaction being able to share my passions with the students and to watch their skills grow as the years progressed. But even with a stable job and spiriting away precious time for my own craft to release my stress, the relationship between Lila and I became strained. We were both relatively calm-natured people, so luckily our fights never got out of hand. Lila had left behind part of her art practice to raise Harry and work part-time at an office. She still created watercolours around our son's sporting and school events, but nothing compared to what she had created in university. I asked her once how it had been so easy to let that part of her go. A selfish question, I realise now. Of course it was not easy, but she had to do it for Harry. I love my son dearly, but he never took to art like myself and his mother. Privately, I do find it difficult to connect with him on a deeper level sometimes. Perhaps this is something all parents feel at some point. And so, a few years ago, Lila and I divorced. It was amicable, and I'm grateful we were able to get through the process as smoothly as possible, and were able to hold it mostly together until Harry turned 18. He was still upset, of course, but I think he understands now why we made our decision. The evening we finally decided to start the process of getting a divorce, a few months before Harry's 18th, Lila held my hands between hers and told me she knew I had to go. The occasional school trip to visit galleries was not enough to sustain me, and I missed my own practice terribly. I argued with her, of course. I didn't deserve such kindness from her, and I ought to get over it and become a better husband. But even as I said it, I knew deep down she was right. I had an itch that nothing had been able to help, and it was just getting bigger as time went on. I would constantly lose focus and zone out and struggle to sleep as ideas and colours constantly moved around my mind. And so, with the savings I had put away for potential holidays or accidents in the future, I left my wife and went travelling overseas to visit as many galleries as I could. Don't worry, Miss Fox, even as someone as airheaded as I can realise how selfish that sounds. I am still the luckiest man alive to have ever married my beautiful Lila. Even luckier that she was able to understand me so deeply. I still supported and do support both Lila and Harry however they need, and I often make my way back to see them. But for the most part, I travel the world away from them. I would have evenings alone in a small hotel I was able to rent for cheap, where I would almost convince myself to fly home the next morning and stop acting like a reckless and self-centered teenager. I would promise myself this was the last gallery I visit, and each time that would be a lie. I do not think I could find the words to explain the impact seeing these artworks in person had on me. It was a profound experience where it felt like finally someone else understood how to speak the language of my soul. My art practice at this time swinged between painting with gouache and working on sculptural pieces with clay. I still loved creating different shapes and abstract portraits, but my works now often delved into religious tones. I don't consider myself an overly religious person, but I was always fascinated with my parents' faith, and touring great cathedrals brought back those memories and curiosity. This ventured into the idea of the two sides of men, the good and the evil. I combined this with my abstract images and started creating works that looked like something simple at first glance, but became more confusing and congested the longer you looked. Of course, I was a big Salvador Dali fan from his surrealist works, especially the piece The Temptation of Saint Anthony. I spent time looking through his works again and came across Galatea of the Spheres. This gorgeous work holds spheres of different shades organised in such a way that, from afar, it takes the shape of Dali's wife Gala. This illusion work then led me to M.C. Escher, another fantastic artist who created impossible constructions and mind-bending images. You have probably seen his work Relativity, the impossible staircases leading up and down and around. I also looked into zoetropes, the spinning cylinder with different images to create the illusion of motion, during my sculptural days, and found myself following the path of illusion once more. I loved the idea that the artist was sharing a story that had been created for us. I was lucky enough to see Oleg Shupliak's work in person. He is a master of illusionary works, and I spent hours looking at the paintings from all angles, close and far. Did you know that optical illusions were believed to have dated back to ancient Greece, where our eyes, brain, or both would trick us into seeing things that aren't there? There was a small plaque in the exhibition that had more information on it. A part I remember was German physicists Hermann von Helmholtz stated that illusions happen when our preconceived notions of reality do not match what we see, calling it a cognitive illusion. There were many varied types of illusions, of course. I always remember those small lenticular cards my son would get that held 2 images of a cartoon he liked. Tilting it from side to side would reveal 2 different facial expressions. Or those moving images of a black and white spiral you would stare at, and when you looked away, it was like your space was also spiraling. These types of illusions have tried to be categorized over the years, but I believe they were best put by author Seckel. Literal optical illusions are 2 different images compressed into one. Physiological optical illusions overstimulate the brain with light, shapes, and colors. Cognitive optical illusions are like logical paradoxes that present inherently contradictory information. It was also fascinating how we could manipulate our brain into confusion. Our brains constantly add information to what our eyes report and filling in the blanks when needed. It was like when you are able to comprehend a word that had the correct first and last letter, but the middle section was all scrambled. Our brains don't just rely on what they see, but also what they expect to see. I was obsessed with it all, and it certainly made its way into my own works as well. My apologies, Miss Fox. I am sure I have shared too much. It's all too easy to write to you. It's like the pen steals the words to write them down before I can even think. We will fast forward a little bit to last year when I visited Italy again. I was still following the optical illusion trails, but also wanting to continue my exploration into religious themes. While I can be a bit disorganized at times, I do try and plan my trips well to save money where I can. Unfortunately, this time round, I had an unexpected flight delay and arrived in Italy very early one morning. I had planned to switch hotels after one evening, and having missed the first one, I wasn't able to check into the new one until late noon. I was overexhausted, having not slept on the plane, and was looking for an inexpensive place to wait. I should have eaten breakfast, but I was still nauseous from the descent. I must have asked a random passerby for a suggestion and was directed to a small church that had a small exhibition on. I won't lie, much of that day is spotty in my memories, but I somehow arrived safely and made my way inside. The front was unassuming, but even with my rolling luggage, I was able to go inside and sit on the pews. It was very quiet. Only the faint sounds of traffic and lost words drifting in every now and then as the doors opened. The place was certainly smaller than most places I had visited, but it was beautiful nonetheless. There were the usual religious oil paintings hung up, but mixed in were several surrealist works of fields and gardens. Some scenes of children running or dogs jumping in ponds. I was so tired and hungry by this point, probably dehydrated as well, but all I could do was stare and try and absorb those beautiful paintings. It happened slowly, so I didn't notice it at first, but the paintings, they started moving. Not quickly and not overtly so, but like with an optical illusion, where your eyes flick over it at first, but you are pulled back to look closer. The closer I looked, the more I could see the figures moving back and forth, flowers swaying in the wind and splashes of water coming from the pond. It was nothing like I had ever seen before. It was like the paintings had truly come alive. I sat there for hours, mesmerized by the bouncing colors and spinning shapes, until one of the ladies politely tapped my shoulder and told me they would be closing for the evening. I had somehow spent an entire day here without realizing. Again, it becomes slightly blurred, but I made my way to the new hotel, ordered the cheapest pizza I could find, and drank several cups of water. I do remember the moments before finally giving in to sleep that night. Unsure if I could even trust what I saw that day, I hoped it would reappear again. And it did. I continued my schedule and visited galleries and exhibitions, and the works continued to share their true selves to me. They moved as if dancing to an unheard tune. They pulsated with colour and vibrancy and told me their secrets. I was lucky enough to see some of Artemisia Gentileschi's work, and her piece, Judith Slaying Holofernes, was a terrifying sight. I could see the thrust of sword into Holofernes, his blood pouring out over the bed. I had nightmares about that moving image for weeks, yet I was still in awe at what it had showed me. This strange ability I had picked up continued on. The next trip home, I told Lila one evening over tea about what I had been experiencing. She raised one of her perfect eyebrows at me and said, "Wasn't that what I was looking for? Searching for paintings that spoke to my soul?" She was right, of course, but I don't think she ever fully understood what I was trying to share with her. I have since tried to capture what I see within my own works. I use optical illusions and mind tricks to show the movement and secret language that's being spoken, but it's never quite the same. While the works aren't performing exactly how I wish, they are doing well with the public. It's a pleasant surprise after some quieter periods in my career. But even then, I am disappointed I can never get them quite right. I cannot help but add illusion to all my works now. I simply can't bear to see a static picture. For whatever reason, while any other painting or artwork I perceive shares its movement, my own works continue to stay still. I don't know why this is the case. Perhaps by being aware of the secret, it's locked me out from creating it myself. I don't know why I was chosen to see what I can, but I do cherish it as a gift. It has been a pleasure to share this with you, and perhaps some of your audience will now also be able to see the movement. Thank you for listening, Miss Fox. Hans. And that brings us to the end of today's story. Wow, what a read. Thank you, Hans, for your letter. I actually went to art school as well, in case it wasn't obvious. And I also have many fond memories of my time there. I took a few excursions myself and was lucky enough to spend some time in Rome. I understand what you mean by its beauty and grand scale. It's impressive, and I encourage any interested listeners to look up the artists he described. I can't say I have ever seen any moving paintings though. As cool as it sounds, I don't know if I could handle it. I'm overwhelmed by large paintings enough as is. This has been another broadcast by Fine Line Station. I'm Charlie Fox, and I'll speak to you next time.